itself is enough. I mean, I'm looking at three amazing colleagues who I don't know the words, I absolutely adore all three of you. I mean, personally, the work that you continue to do, where you're at. So I'm just gonna start by saying, navigating leadership, BIPOC dance leadership in today's higher education climate is what they're gonna be talking about. Charles Anderson, professor of Afro-Contemporary Dance, Ohio State University. I don't need to go into Charles's resume because, like I said, you're looking at three people who are amazing scholars, amazing creators, and amazing administrators. I'll just leave it there. Cheyla Clawson, Director of School of Performing Arts at Wichita State University, who continues to lead in a way that's remarkable. Krista U. Davis, this sister, I said this to her today. I said, every time you speak, I'm at standstill. At standstill. And so, I just turn it over to you three and just do what you do. And we're grateful and thankful that you're here.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to kind of get us started. And so Cornelia said, I think we're all in three very different places. I want to give huge gratitude to both Crystal and Charles. For me, they've been an incredible support system and teachers and mentors. And I've had them at my university, both of them multiple times with anti-racism bias. And so I feel really fortunate to be here with them and that they wanted all of us to engage in this conversation. But yeah, I'm humbled and inspired myself. Just as a setup of the panel, I think that this to me is like testimonial. And just like aligns with, and I have notes so I'll stay on track too, with long traditions of storytelling from communities of color and critical race storytelling. That's often a methodological tool to look at anti-colonialism and disrupting structures of oppression. So I say that because I'm going to try to keep us on time because we have so much to share. But I also think the testimonio, what I like about it, I think, is that as a Mexican-American woman, is that it doesn't have to be linear and the story is enough. Like sharing our experience and our stories is enough. So in that, considering that, I think it would be nice for us to go through what we're going to say and hold questions to the end, so we have some time and space to share that with you. Okay. I think we're starting by just a little bit maybe about the institutions we're at and what that kind of structure looks like. Do you want to start, Charles?
Yeah, I'm Charles O. Anderson. I am currently at the Ohio State. As of the end of 2024, I just resigned from being the chair of the department at Ohio State. Prior to arriving there in 2022, I had spent 11 years at the University of Texas at Austin, where I had the good fortune of leading that program and founding an MFA in dance and social justice. Just try not to overtalk it. I'm an artist, educator, and advocate for systemic transformation in the arts. Dance is my medium, but it is also my lens for examining and challenging the inequities entrenched in our institutions. Over my career, and especially during my time as chair of the Department of Dance at the Ohio State, I have witnessed how institutions champion anti-racism superficially while resisting at their core.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just gonna say me too. Except the Ohio State part. My name is Crystal U. Davis. I'm at University of Maryland on College Park. I'm also at a Research One institution, a large flagship land grant institution, meaning we're supposed to be responsible for giving back to the communities for which we've stolen land. It's kind of supposed to be the point of a land grant institution when you hear people talk about that. And I am the head of the dance program here. I've been there for 8 years. I'm an associate professor, so I just recently got tenure. My research is challenges and implicit biases in dance and dance education. Thinking about our preferences for the dance forms we enjoy and the types of bodies we like to watch. And to name that out loud so we can understand our position and relationship when we're talking to each other, when we're assessing and when we're deliberating about grants and such, right? So that's my point.
Yeah, all the same, except the difference is I'm at Wichita State University. It's in Kansas, kind of in the middle of the country, so and that's it's a public what do they call it? Research 1, emerging research. Well, we're research 2, right? Wanting to be a research 1. We are they call it an urban university that is a public university, and in Kansas we have the most racial and ethnic diversity in the state, and we serve the most first-gen students as well, and we are the biggest city in the state. So we want to be in R1. We have more funding, actually, research funding coming in compared to the people that are R1s already as an R2, but we need 27 more doctorates. So that's kind of the push. We are also an emerging HSI, Hispanic Serving Institute. We're at 19% as of this past fall, with the goal of that you have to reach 25% 2030. So I have been at Wichita State. I'm currently the director of the School of Performing Arts, so that's dance, theater, musical theater, design and technical theater. I'm the first woman of color, not the first woman, and the first dance faculty to hold that position. Pros and cons about all of that. So I just finished my 3rd year in that position. I was dance faculty. I started as non-tenure track, adjunct, and then full-time at $30,000 a year, non-tenure track, and then became on a tenure track in 2019 because they had this path for me to be the director. And when I started that, I was one of 2 assistant professors and had mostly full professors in my department. So I think that was indicative of the lack of transparency, leadership training. If I was coming in that position and there were all these full professors. Yeah, so it's been similar, an interesting path, but yeah, that's where I'm at right now. So I think in the context, I just wanted to ask quickly, both of you, can you give us, from your own perspective and your knowledge and experience, of a brief of the foundations of higher ed in the United States, and I think what we're about to talk about, as brief as possible when we're thinking about, I'm thinking about even for indigenous peoples, and anyway, would you like to speak a little bit about that, either of you? I know I'm trying to keep us on a timer, that this could be
That's a
long,
remix question.
but a short, so we have context.
I can tell you coming in what I didn't know about foundations. I was actually relatively appalled by how little I knew and really how ultimately uninformed the decision to go into higher ed actually was. I can tell you that I got into a tenure track position. I finished my MFA in 2020, no, not even 2020, what am I saying? 2003, and didn't come into a higher ed institution until 2016. So I was out working and I didn't understand once I got on tenure, first of all, how coveted the tenure track lines were. I didn't really have a full sense of that. And then people kept talking about you just need to get tenure, you just need to get tenure. And then once I got in, I was like, okay, great. So after tenure, that's when I learned about full professorship. There was another hurdle. I was not, and maybe I glazed over it in my MFA training, but really just kind of structurally what you're in for. I was not aware of that. Also the kind of value systems of metrics and how to fit the arts as how do you grade, assess, evaluate, and assign numbers to what we do. inside of an institution felt very, everybody has a different system of how they're doing that. Every institution has a different workaround, kind of, but it all feels like a workaround for me. I'll just stop there. That's the part I don't know.
I'll keep it in the narrative to respond to that. So my career is one of those where, as an aspiring professional choreographer, I also had the good fortune of being recruited by Kariana Welsh to come to Temple to do my MFA. And so my path in education and choreography have been parallel. My first position was at a small liberal arts college, at Muhlenberg College, where I was the only African-American professor in the entire university. But it gave me an opportunity to create an Africana Studies minor as an assistant professor. And the naive part of me thought that, well, that's just what you're supposed to do because you want to be the change you seek. And so I did that, and I will just anecdotally say the president told me, well, you'll never be a great leader because you don't know how to talk to everyone, which is absolutely untrue. But nonetheless, I digress. And then I moved over to the University of Texas at Austin because they put out a sign for a professor of African diasporic dance, which was the first time I'd ever seen that. So I went on down to Texas, thinking I'm going to be at ground zero for social change, and that was, again, an uphill climb, and that's where I learned about having dual appointments where I was in their African and African diasporic studies program as well as in theater and dance. And that always sounds sweet till you find out that's a 200%, that's not a 50-50. And so just cutting to the chase, as things started to evolve there, Barack Obama had been in his second term. Things were great for a second, and they weren't because in 2016 happened, and that's when I became the director of the dance program at UT Austin, where I did a radical shift to the curriculum because no one had ever made space for my position. They advertised for it, but we were still primarily a ballet and Eurocentric contemporary program. So took the time to start to refashion things so that we could also draw on the rich dance populations in Texas. There are so many African American and Latina dancers there who were not at UT Austin. There were none when I first arrived in that place. So that became the work. Moving forward, that started to get me into these spaces with you all. The pandemic hit. Last time I was here was just before the pandemic, where I got to sit with my hero, Cheyla Clawson, who was the first dance company I'd ever seen perform. I didn't start dancing until 19. I was at Cornell for mechanical engineering. So I sat with her, and that opened me up to possibilities. Came to Ohio State at the time where they had their first lesbian president and their first black women provost. Beautiful, hopeful time, post-2020, so we all know the signs were out again about, Black Lives Matter, diversity. So I thought I was coming to the promised land. They were out within 1 year that I was there. And I was there because of them literally, heavy-handedly. They handpicked me, and so in these past 2 years, I have done the work that I said I was going to do. I have brought a Latina studies presence into our department. I just passed our first tenure track search for an African diasporic percussive dancer that has not been anywhere in the country, so a tenure track position in that, along with summer initiatives to engage populations. And that's all for me to say the landscape is one where the labor, the hidden labor of doing what we all are hired to do while black or while of color or while a woman is not rewarded, but often touted. And I say it that way because it's that interesting thing. Even down to the curatorial, thinking about Dwayne yesterday, I just had Ronald K. Brown out to Ohio State, and they were all like, wow, this is so exciting. I mean, the 40th anniversary. Doug Barone had never been to Ohio State. I just brought him. Sidra Bell is now in her PhD, and I had to fight for that. So many of the things that I did were uphill battles that from the outside, people are like, you're doing it.
came into the role in 2021, we started with a 3-hour remote anti-racism training in Charles. And at that time, there were a lot of full professors. We were majority white faculty. And then we kind of just did it. And then you came on campus, and then we've had Crystal through the BIPOC. But for me, I think with the team, it was the team having this consistent training as a full team. And I think last year, for the first time, we were a 60% faculty of color. So we were able to make that big transition, but now we have some people leaving. You know,
Retention is another.
retention's a whole nother thing, but I think that doing that, when I think of bringing other people along and not having to have to do all the labor myself, but now I have a young black faculty member that I see struggling a little bit, and how do I support them, like as we bring on more faculty of color. So I was just thinking about that as well, like how do you mobilize people to want to work together. So that's been one thing I think that's been helpful. But I also think of, just to share briefly, because we want to be a Hispanic Serving Institute, and we have, so anyway, in 2022, I was featured on this magazine for the university that goes out to like 200,000 alumni. So it's myself, they hired a new director for HSI initiatives, and then a woman. HSI. And did I say that?
No, you didn't say.
Hispanic Serving Institution, sorry.
Thank you.
That's a recruiter in engineering. So these 3 women, they put us on the cover. Okay, great, they're gonna tell our story. So I felt a little tokenized, but in the actual article, it was like 45% of each of their stories is someone that is this director of HSI initiatives, Hispanic Serving Institute, and then an engineering person, and then I'm the arts person. So it was just, I'm just thinking of what, and yeah, like we want you to do these things and be this representative for us, but we're not gonna tell your story. So that occurred. I just wanna briefly give, as we go into a few other topics, just some overall, just some data to think about. So this is, well, there's problems with the Census Bureau and the current population survey, but I'm gonna share some of those statistics with you. In 2022, this is, I'm looking at the demographics of the United States. There were 59.2% white. It is estimated that that will only be around 44% by 2060, so no longer the majority. It was about 19% Hispanic, Latina, and expected to grow to 28% by 2060. Black African American was 12.5, a steady small increase to 13.6. Like that's a prediction. But no matter what, by 2060, we're looking at the population of folks of color being the majority. So keeping that in mind. Educational attainment. This is of 2022. For those who are white, overall with a bachelor's degree and higher was almost 42%. Black or African American overall was almost 28%. And Hispanic, or I'm gonna say Latina, they have Latino, is almost 21%. Graduate degrees, white, almost 16%. Black or African American, almost 11%. And Hispanic or Latina, about 6.4. So keeping this in mind, population, the degrees being earned, the current composition as of 2021, that was the most current I could get from the American Council on Education. 67 professors were white, and the majority were full professors. 5.6% were black, with the most concentrated in assistant professors. 5.3 were Hispanic, with the most in assistant. And that counts part-time, adjunct, kind of just across that spectrum. So white are overrepresented, black and Hispanic faculty are underrepresented.
And relatively contingent status.
Thank you.
Of not being able to stay permanently with the same permanency.
Correct. And then undergraduate enrollment at that same time is 53.4% white expected. That's a decrease of 70% in the last 10 years. 13.1% black, 20.6% Hispanic, and 12.9% other non-white. So really, just you're looking at what, 44% to 66%, and thinking about what the faculty look like. And then the last thing before we move on if you all are hearing about the demographic cliff. It's like the scary language in the room about there's less students graduating from high school. So an article this is by the Western Interstate Commission of Higher Ed that came out in December, also talks about this, that we know that we're gonna have an increase in Hispanic and multiracial students in the future, a decrease in white students. And then also, I think this is important too, likely number of youths identify as Black in combination with another race or ethnicity are categorized as multiracial. So we know what populations are growing and what are not, but we're looking at, I think, just to sit with the representation that is not there and what's coming for the future. So keeping that in mind. I'm gonna skip because we kind of gave us the next thing to ask Crystal. Like just your experiences, this is marginalization, discrimination, microaggressions, and emotional labor. It's a lot. Choose what you'd like to, but just some experiences in those areas as an administrator.
Yeah.
As an administrator. I know we've
Yeah.
had
Yep.
long histories.
Yep, yep. I'm gonna try to tell it in a way that hopefully will be guide marks for other people. When I came in as untenured professor, because I actually did do 1 year at Columbia College in South Carolina. That was actually heavenly. It's just that the financial bottom fell out on that institution, and we came in August, and I think in October they gathered all faculty in and said, we do not have enough money to pay for your spring salary checks. So I think and hope that they rectified some of the financial stuff, but that meant for me, I could not stay there. I needed to find somewhere else. I could not trust that they were gonna get it together. So I started applying out. And so University of Maryland is my first kind of extended time at a university. And I came in immediately running programs. And I didn't understand at that time that is, suicide is a strong word. But what it's doing, so what it does is when you are doing administrative leadership, it's taking the energy from the research work you're trying to accomplish creatively. It has your butt in a seat somewhere looking at a screen and not in the studio and not in your creative joy most of the time. Unless your work intersects in some way. So when they say, you're so talented, we would like for you to run this program, ask them why their full professors are not running the programs. Because the full professors, they should have kind of graduated into a place where they have more space and time to do that labor. The other thing valuatively in higher ed is that, I'm talking to this labor thing, is that there is a fluid line between administration as leadership and administration as service. So you'll be running these programs, and at first they'll be saying you're so talented in your skill set, but then they'll say, now list it under service, which nobody looks at. The service part. They only care about your research primarily, and I'm only speaking from research one institutions. The teaching ones are a little bit better of really carving out a value around your teaching if you go to a teaching institution. But for these research ones, your research is the bread and butter. So when they say you are a wonderful leader and put you in an administrative role, and then they tell you to list your administrative leadership under service, you need to make sure that that gets elevated or oriented and framed around leadership and not around service, because they're gonna wanna put it in service. And service they value very little. So I was doing a lot of labor that I was not aware, while we had full faculty that were not running any programs. And for my time at University of Maryland, I have been running a program one program or another, almost consistently without a full year off. So I've been trying to do that while I'm still doing my research and trying to get tenure. And I'm still not full, right? Apparently there's another bar. So it's like, oh, I gotta write another book, okay. So I just wanted to say that about the labor. The other thing is, veils have been pulled back, I think, in this 2025 moment. And now I have colleagues that are just expressly saying that the support is informative. it's performative support of folks of color. So there is kind of a limitation on how much kind of support you're going to get. When there is a moment to be seen supporting, there may be some support, but the how, so for example, we supported her to write the book, but nobody told me anything about these book tours. I don't know anything about it. I don't understand how to promote my work, and nobody in the dance area has written a book.
Right. Yeah.
So there are these kind of negotiations of where we need to make sure we're being seen supporting, because the university wants to make sure people are being supported, but there's only so much, and of course everybody else has their own labor as well. You know what I mean?
I'm gonna add to it real quick just because it's similar. So when I started the directorship, I was also assistant professor, didn't have tenure. I was supported to go early, thankfully, but it was the same thing, that there were all these full professors. I even this year am trying to talk to the most senior professor who's been there almost 38 years and won't take a leadership position, like refuses to. So it was a similar, I've had a similar experience of trying to do it, but something that I was successful at made me think about to share is I went to the provost and I just said, I have to now in a few more years try to be full professor, and that's important. And how do I do this if my dean tells me I'm 100% administrative and I have no release time? And she talked with me about and said she would talk with the university TMP committee. This is why
Tenure and promotion.
Sorry, tenure and promotion, thank you. Tenure and promotion committee for the university about, like, maybe a lot of you do, I'm the producer, right, for any shows we do. Like to put all of that in creative as also creative leadership, but to put it in the research and creative. So I just had some real direct conversations.
Do y'all hear that? So it's about categorization.
Yes.
It's about where things go on the CV.
Yes, so what Crystal was saying under service, that's where most of my administrative duties go, but helping the provost help. We had a conversation and then my dean had to support it, which I kind of almost just demanded. So I feel like going directly to some, that may or may not be successful, but it was for me to start to have those conversations. I went over the dean's head, she wasn't happy at first, to the provost, and then we had a real conversation about it, where I said, well, you're not giving me any guidelines or support, so I felt like I had to go beyond that, which isn't always, yeah, anyway, Charles.
I'm a little different. I am a full professor. I left one institution with that rank to come to this other institution. I say that because even at this institution, people forget that and talk to me like I'm an associate professor still, and like as if they can hold it over me for some sort of ascension, and I'm like, I've arrived. And I'm kind of saying that because, as I mentioned, I just resigned, and I think when people hear that, they think I've lost all of my privileges. And I think advice is to remember that the privilege of tenure is irrevocable, even when you assume leadership. And so I say that because I'm gonna be all right, like in terms materially. Emotionally, it really has been a very disappointing thing, and I'm saying that knowing I have a loan from the Ohio State here. I'm not going into detail, but I want to be clear, I got my feelings. So let's say it that way. To talk about, it took me a long time to become a full professor at UT Austin, because as an associate professor, I assumed leadership in dance, in a theater and dance department for those of us who exist in those spaces. So I was at the very bottom rung, especially as a Black queer man in those roles. And so it took me 4 years longer than I had anticipated to become a full professor. But in saying that, and I'm not bragging, but I think it's important we always hear this, at every institution I've been in, except for this one, because I just got there, I've also been recognized at the top rank is excellence in education. And so when I've approached these roles of leadership, it's with my core identity centered, meaning I'm an artist and I'm an educator and I'm a social change agent. And students tend to respond to that, not because you're indoctrinating them, but you're actually creating relevance around the traditions, around the innovations, rather than treating them as abstract entities. And I'm also also saying that partially because of the eclecticism of my own background. I was in Cunningham in ballet work when I started going to the club, and then I met Ron, and then I didn't realize that my whole upbringing had been dance in the Black Baptist Church, and I'm like, oh, shit, I've been dancing my whole life. But I'm saying all of that because bringing that into the academy was revolutionary at the time to actually legitimize the pedagogies that have always existed, that the academy often picks up and then places in the center. That became my work, but it also became my labor to keep that space. So I say it that way, and I am going to read so I don't overtalk. So I think Baldwin captures the heart of this struggle. The world changes according to the way, James Baldwin, the world changes according to the way people see it, and if you alter even by a millimeter the way people look at reality, then you can change it. Changing perspectives is not welcomed in institutions invested in maintaining power. And I mention that because even in our time here, and it's not me finger wagging, but I'm noticing it lately, we have stepped away from saying words like racism and anti-racism. And the jargon is shifting. Like, we know we can't say DEI anymore. And we're barely getting away with bias. And being a Generation S, I'm gonna stand 10 toes deep in anti-racism, and racism exists. And I think it's important to not shy away from literally the foundation of this country. Like, this country is racist. And if we can't ever say it out loud, our labor only becomes worse. And I'm saying that because I am so excited to not be in an administrative role so that I can say that and not be like, oh, you're not holding space for everyone. I'm like, fuck everybody else. I'll stop there.
I told Crystal yesterday, Charles gonna say 5. Yes. So but you kind of brought up structures, and I think that's that's kind of leads into the next thing about structures and cultures. And because we are in spaces that weren't created for us, and especially racial organizations and systems like the academy, like what are things that have hindered or maybe supported you along the way that you can think of? And I just thought right away as I was thinking about the underrepresentation of especially Black and Latinx faculty members compared to the population of our country, that I don't know about you all, but I don't know of there's no one at my university. I do equity pedagogy with a Black woman in health professions. We do that together. She's a full professor. But for me, there are no Latinx, and definitely not Latinx women, like at that intersection, that I can have as a mentor. Like, I'm just thinking about, like you were saying, Crystal, you didn't know there's another level? Who's telling us these
and I'm
things?
screaming from the rooftops with my MFAs. I was like, okay, here's the deal. This is how it works. So they know, and they don't know. Like, there are other classes that they take, and they aren't hearing that until they get to my class. And I'm like, okay, let's just talk shop. This is how it works.
Yeah, so if you're running an MFA or graduate program, I mean, it's really considering how are you preparing anyone, but really those future faculty of color that need that support or that information and that knowledge.
I mean, I'm coming out also as an Afrocentrist. So, and then I'm saying that because of Kariama Welsh and Brenda Dixon-Gasho, who were my mentors. And I came into this profession not thinking in those ways and never looking at the institution to give me guidance, but to look at the field. And I'm not gonna get weepy, but that man right there set me on a path that I didn't even know about Cornelius. And I'm saying it because we have been around peaking forever, and then he just casually mentioned a couple of things, and I'm like, bitch, what? And so it wasn't like, the talking he just spoke, and I'm like, oh my God, you can exist and be that fly without always performing your intelligence. And I'm saying that because the same was true with Kariama, the same is true with Brenda, even though Brenda's hilarious. But all of them have existed without having which only brings me to the simple thing of, I have always tried to make myself available to anyone in this country who wants to hear what little bit of thoughts that I have.
Hello.
And understanding that I'm doing that pro bono, meaning I ain't gonna get paid for that work, and I ain't gonna be able to show up on my CV because nobody cares. But I don't want to keep walking into spaces where I'm like, I started this like, oh, I'm the only one in the village. Okay, like I want to be able to realize that if I gave you anything to get you into the same room with me, then my job is well worth it.
Amen. Amen.
I think my note was, I was thinking about how laws and policies also prevent us from dismantling. That's a whole nother.
Yeah, well,
please.
yes, well, I feel a certain kind of way about it from the equity and bias perspective though. Because, and I have a little note here, I actually have it in my notes, something about, where is it? Dancers love a personalized exception. We love to make a personalized exception for a very special student and very special this and very special that, because we honor the uniqueness of each individual, right? Like I feel like that may be where that spirit comes from, right? And again, y'all can chime in and be like, I call BS, that's fine, I support it. That's actually credit in my class. But from the equity standpoint, if your rules and policies aren't working for everybody and there needs to be a exception carved out, your rules and policies need to change. Does that make sense? You need to rework them. Sure, maybe there might be an expedient moment where you have to carve out an exception for a person or another, but if you're doing kind of different things for different people, you have to know that you're doing things that you're not able to track that are favoring and in ways that other people can see all of it. And you can't track your stuff. So you have to have the policies there that you create and that you ensure are making sure there is equitable attention and consideration for everybody. And that's a really challenging thing to do when we do such unique, creative work. Do you know what I mean? Like our tenure and promotion guidelines are literally just a list of like kind of what every other creative person has ever done in the unit. That's our policy. Is just, well, you can do a book, you can do a dance, you can do a lectum, you can do it. Like that's it. That's all they have. They don't have how many. They don't have what venues. They don't have any of that stuff fleshed out. And somebody is assessing me on whether I get tenure or not, with no explicit evaluative thing because our work is so unique.
I feel something that's missing in education still is, Crystal is casually saying equity. In almost every space I've been in, people assume equity and equality are the same thing.
They're not.
And I'm sure we've all seen those graphics of people standing at the what really strikes a chord with me is also how profoundly ignorant we are around what racism means. Meaning, we're really talking about institutional racism, and we're brushing up against structural racism.
That's right.
And I will say anecdotally, just to give a little more light, as I resigned, it was because I had the choice of going down the discrimination lawsuit route or taking what I can get. Structurally, Ohio makes it impossible for me to get paid to sue, meaning the state has a cap on what you can actually, the recompense you can receive, even if you're proven right. And the damage to your career is going to be considerably more costly. That's structural. Institutionally, institutional racism is what pushed me there, meaning that all of that quality was there. Like, I have all the rights and privileges as everyone else, but the interpretation of my experience was at the hands of people who don't understand the experience of being the first Black queer male chair of this department that has always been run by white women, except for one Black woman who lasted 1 year. And so I say those things because even in our curriculum, especially in dance, we don't think we have time to break that down, but we want to bring all these little brown kids into the programs and not school them on how to navigate those programs. That's integral
Yeah, all of it. I'm thinking of, Cyrus, what you shared yesterday about, well, I was thinking about lots of things that you shared yesterday, but how to get beyond performative allyship and get people on board. Like, what does that look like? So it made me think about, in my unit, we've done a lot of, like, when it was first year, we redid our vision and mission and goals, but we tied all of that to diversity, equity, inclusion at that time. So we were able to implement a social justice certificate, do 2 hires of minoritized faculty, and that required the group to agree to change a position. So that was, I think, a big push, and I think this simultaneous training together helped when I'm thinking of things that have been working. And then we also like have this a community where we're situated in a Black and brown community at our university, making sure that we have some kind of curricular element in each of our areas that ties to the community based on having a conversation with what they're interested in versus us taking what we want and putting it onto the community. So I think we've had some successes, but that's in my unit, and we've clarified together our policies and practices. That's been a big push for the last, because I'm finishing my 3rd year too, as you were saying, Cyrus. But I'm also then thinking though, in my first year when I went to my dean and tried to have this conversation about equity and equality and advocating, like, you want me to be the DEI person for the university, on the university board for our college, and he raised his voice and told me they're the same thing. And so I'm just also want to put out there are a lot of roadblocks, and that's some of the emotional labor that when I get to that administrative level, like the dean and above, that I'm grateful for the work that we're doing in the immediate department unit. But part of me this whole past 6 months have just wanted to quit, because beyond that, it's just like it's this constant roadblock. I feel good about the culture I'm in, and I think this is part of what Matt, you talked about the culture, right, yesterday, and I was thinking, well, we've done a lot of department culture, but beyond that, if we don't have control, I still just feel beat down over and over again.
I'm going to piggyback, because the institution I came into, as I mentioned, the leadership at the time made me feel like, oh, finally, all the pieces, all the way up to the top, they are about that life. And then I discovered they got ousted. And I'm saying that because the department that I'm in, and I think many of us know it, it seems cutting edge. Our curriculum is around contemporary, ballet, and African and diasporic forms. Those are required for everyone. On the surface, that sounds exciting. We are a large department, and over 50% are people of color. On the surface, that's exciting. When I get into the rooms with my colleagues, we are so entrenched in a legacy of our white female founders, and I'm just saying it bluntly, so then that's not me attacking anyone who's white. It's been fascinating to show up as me in those spaces and to realize, because Crystal talks about it beautifully in her book, that we did all of that, but we forgot what belonging's about. Like, they were treating me, as I mentioned, I'm a full professor, they still treat me like a house guest, like not realizing that it's my damn house. And so we spent our time in those 2 years literally trying to get the folks who've been there on the margins into the center, and that is literally what created the demise of my leadership. The fact that I would not back down from saying, no, this assistant professor who has all of the pedigree that you wish you had and you still treat like she's not qualified needs to have a voice and leadership in how we run this department. And that work would have been supported by the upper administration, but when they left, there was a vacuum that was filled with mediocrity. And I'm saying it because I feel shady. In terms of there are things that, how do I put it? The beauty of privilege is that you can hang back and let all this work happen, and you get to ride the coattails like, yeah, I supported that effort. And so there are a lot of folks who just waited for us, who did the work to be moved to the side to now step into this space, but they don't know what to do with that work. And so I just offer that because I think it's so important that we definitely pat ourselves on the back for the inch we make, but again, being Gen X and being about Black power and not civil rights, I like that little inch is something beyond incremental progress, these conversations just keep happening, and I'm tired of them. So
and I'll say I've done a couple of pieces of research on like administrative leadership in dance, and just know if you feel alone, that's because there is a vapid hole of a lack of mentorship. It is not you. It is not somewhere to go that you should have went and you don't know to go there. Nobody knows. Everybody gets thrown into these roles and to figure it out on their own. And so you're most likely going to have some institutions are starting to do a better job with more intentional mentorship, but that really is kind of across the board everywhere. So don't be afraid to call your people and really ask some questions.
This is the place to do it.
Yes.
Yes. Well, maybe a shift. I think kind of to maybe end a little, to discuss maybe things like resilience or strategies that have helped you as an administrator of color to keep some sanity, perhaps.
Pipeline notion that I think we all have been alluding to, like whenever we can actually coalition build, because that's we're in 2025 and we got to where we are because we forgot how to organize, and you see what happened. I'm just gonna say it that way. And then accountability structures, understanding that, and Crystal said it beautifully. We aren't a monolith. Like I call shit out. Some people hang back and they see it like, but I ain't gonna say it. But understanding that how do we create the mechanisms to hold each other accountable for however we're holding the line, and making sure that we check in to make sure the line doesn't get lost as we navigate in our respective ways. And then again, maybe it's militant, like approaching this like a goddamn war, like understanding like we are in cultural war. So it's like, are we keeping our eye on the prize of cultural shift, or are we starting to fall into the enticement of being rewarded for saying something and seeing how it's cauterizing literally the lifeline that brought that truth to power in the first place.
I'm just gonna read a thing.
Come on.
Please.
From a book chapter. I'm gonna name the book because I'm doing a shameless plug of Karen Shoup and Sherry Barr's work, because they have really held me down. They've reached out for a lot of opportunities and support. They have a book called Stories We Dance, Stories We Tell, Essays on Dance and Higher Education, which is autoethnography for people in dance. And so I wrote a chapter about, they tapped me to write about, and when I was still junior faculty, to write about being a Black person in leadership in higher ed. I was like, I'm not writing that. I still got tenure to get. I can't write that honestly and outright, like to say the things I need to say. But I found a way around, and this actually kind of speaks to that way around. And I say in the book chapter that we, as folks of color, this is specifically about Black people, we have an alchemical gift for taking shenanigans and fuckery and transforming it into something different. We already have that. So I just want to name, there's always kind of possibilities to say, that looks crazy. And the thing that might instinctually come to you is like, well, maybe I should go talk to so-and-so, and maybe I should go do this thing. It can be your superpower. So to name that you are already coming in with the skills because you made it to those places in the first place, right? The skills that you employ to get those jobs are the skills that you can employ, right? So I said, I call it alchemical process. I said, this transformation process is an alchemical experience in a similar way that Jane Alexander, who wrote a wonderful book on dance leadership in 2017, that Alexander's description of dance leadership forms something distinct from its elements of dance and leadership. Our leadership styles, while varied and unique, I'm talking about the Black people that I've worked with here, our leadership styles, while varied and unique, have the common theme of taking the negative effects of interactions, stereotypes, and systemic challenges that white supremacist culture enacts and transforming those challenges into valuable insights, clarifying needs for action, or strategic tips on how to move toward a fuller sense of equity and belonging in the communities where we lead. So that looks like, oh, I see you, I got that. And you make your note, and then you navigate accordingly, right? That's a skill set that when you are in a minoritized identity, you're having to do that. And to employ that in your place, trust your gut on those, because that's what got you there in the first place. So I'll say that.
Beautiful. I just have some, and I'm like practical Paula. I'm just thinking of then, and again, it started in 2021. I'm just thinking in my department and the work that some of like the things that we've implemented. I would say we have a student leadership coalition, and there has to be, we have students of color representative, we have all programs representative. We just implemented that last year to try to give students more of a voice. When I think about like other strategies, we have a core curriculum and we added an inclusion class, and we can't use anti-racism in the title, but it is in the course materials. That is a new course that every student in our school has to take. So I think of like, how are we implementing, and we're about to do 4 hires. So if anyone has graduate students for acting, contemporary dance, design and technical theater, we're about to hire, but part of that was really going through and agreeing on some rubrics to help lessen bias and our processes. So the hiring processes we've also worked a lot on. Doesn't mean they're perfect, but in the strategic plan, the other step that I took is like when we're thinking about performative allyship, and we have folks on that team, and they're probably both aware since they've been to my school and met a lot of the faculty, but we assigned like those objectives in the strategic plan to certain people, so that we're trying, I think, what'd you say, accountability structures that Charles just mentioned, like are there ways, especially as I'm a leader, because I also feel I'm like, oh, you're the diversity person. But we know Cheyla is like a good representative for all of us, but of trying to find, I'm just thinking of the accountability. And then something new this year is we kind of did testimonial, 3 minutes, with all the faculty to the students. Like when we talked about our ancestral and cellular history, like every faculty did that this year for the first time, and we invite students to do it. So I think that's like another initiative to where we're kind of just trying to I think you've talked about it, of getting them out of what's this dance form I'm learning, what's this theater, like who are we as people when we start? And now I know we only have 2 minutes. Recommendations that can better for higher ed and how they can support, or the folks in this room, leaders of color.
I'm going with my quote. So I think if you got nothing else, the work of anti-racism is not easy, and it comes with significant personal and professional costs. I hope you've heard that. Again, as James Baldwin reminds us, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. My recommendation is that we have to face systemic exploitation of BIPOC leaders, meaning coming in understanding if you see somebody like us, you can almost bet that we're doing more than what you expected. It lift us up rather than like, so glad you're here, I'm going on vacation now. To address the deeply ingrained structures of whiteness that resist transformation. The insights of thinkers like Kahindi Andrews and Kahindi Ibrahim make clear that the path forward requires not just the vision, but courage. Courage to dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequity and to build new ones that center justice.
And sing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I was a little late.